Now, just a little warning before we begin that there will be major spoilers for the final episode of Season 1 of Loki in this video, or the one called For All Time Always. So if you have not seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, including the ending, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so first of all, yes, Kang the Conqueror has officially been set up as our big overarching villain of Phase 4, or at least I think we can safely assume that's why they're bringing him in. Though technically that wasn't him at the end of time that Sylvie and our Loki met. That was instead Immortus, a different version or variant of Kang, one of the many versions that exist. However, that statue that Loki sees at the end of the episode, the one in the TVA, is the real Kang, implying he's already making his moves and taking things over, including repurposing the TVA to do his bidding, whatever that might be exactly. Hence, Mobius doesn't recognize Loki at the very end, and he doesn't get to ride a jet ski into the sunset somewhere during the 90s on Earth, though that may still be his happy ending someday eventually down the road, since we learned the show is getting a second season. But anyway, before getting into any of that, let me say I thought this episode did a rather good job of explaining what had happened and or was happening throughout the series. It did answer most questions, I think, but I really should have, considering this 40-minute episode was roughly, 90% exposition, most of which was delivered by Jonathan Majors, who played Kang, or will be playing Kang, and played, again, Immortus here. And thankfully, Majors' acting or delivery of all that exposition was entertaining in and of itself. He essentially had the whole final episode placed on his back and had to carry it, despite this being his first appearance in the MCU, meaning people who don't know Kang don't know the first thing about who this character is supposed to be. It was also, again, a pretty good and clear explanation that we got from him. I can't imagine too many people were left utterly confused by it. This wasn't a case of Matrix Revolutions, where at the end you have this scene that, for many people, I think, myself included, it caused more confusion than answers it gave us. But anyway, basically in the 31st century of Earth, there's a brilliant scientist named Nathaniel Richards, or I'm assuming that'll still be his name, it wasn't given here, who thinks there are universes stacked on top of each other, that there's a multiverse essentially, and he opens portals and meets other versions of himself, and they start to combine their knowledge and wisdom. They start to work together to make everything better for everyone across the multiverse. But of course, there are versions of him out there who are not so benevolent, and a war to conquer the multiverse begins. Then this war threatens to end everything in existence. So Immortus manages to separate out his timeline, what we know to be the sacred timeline, or the one the MCU is, and creates the TVA to stop anything from branching out from it and leading to problems or connecting back to the multiverse, and hence the bigger war. And he somehow, let's not worry too much about it, has everything sort of figured out and or planned throughout all of time on the sacred timeline up till shortly after Loki and Sylvie show up in this episode. He's known everything that was going to happen up until this point, up until this choice they're going to make, meaning the fate of everything was quite literally in the hands of Loki and Sylvie here. They could have either become the rulers of all things and kept the sacred timeline separate and made it how they wanted, or they could be ultimate liberators and let free will reign, but at the cost of branching universes and connecting back to the larger multiverse that's still out there and has always been out there and is conceivably in a state of war, or more than likely isn't in a war anymore, it's just ruled by Kang. And this choice is, of course, the other 10% of the episode, with again the other 90 being just exposition. We have Loki, who believes Immortus and the danger that comes from setting everything free again, and Sylvie, who came here for one reason and one reason alone, to set everything free no matter what. And since she can't trust anyone, she not only doesn't believe Immortus, but she doesn't believe Loki either, or that his intentions are good. She thinks he just wants to rule everything. And so in the end, she tricks Loki, sends him back to the TVA, and kills Immortus, and chaos reigns. Numerous timelines start branching off, and in the short time all this has happened, it appears as if the actual Kang has now taken over the TVA, which means he has full control over the sacred timeline, or the timeline the MCU is set in again. And thus, we have our big overarching conflict and villain of this phase of the MCU, which is to stop Kang and to liberate the multiverse itself from him. Which I'm very cool with overall. I'm not upset that I was dead wrong in my prediction that it'd be a Loki at the end of time, which I do still think would have made a lot of sense for the story they were giving us, that he would have ended up alone at the end of time, that he'd finally have his throne, but that he'd end up as the king of nothing, essentially. I really thought that's exactly what the show was setting up the whole time, and that all the clues pointing at Kang, and they were numerous, were going to be red herrings, or that once end time Loki was stopped, the multiverse would open back up, and this would allow Kang to come into the picture, and that he'd be shown or hinted at in a post-credit scene, thus allowing the final episode of Loki to be, well, about Loki, not just entirely the introduction of Kang. Not that Loki didn't play a part here, or even a huge part. Everything came down to the decision he and Sylvie made or fought over, and they set up the conflict between them in this episode. In the previous episodes of the series, it is believable that they would fight over this. I just feel like maybe this was too much about Kang and not about Loki at the very end. Though since we know we're getting a season 2, I guess that's fine. We'll get a lot more time to further resolve what went on with Sylvie and Loki, so let Kang shine here, I suppose. Also, what this final episode did is show us they're willing to do some truly huge and important events in a Disney Plus series, which I wasn't too sure about after the previous 2 series. Yes, WandaVision saw Wanda become the Scarlet Witch, and it brought her children into the mix and brought back Vision, but it seemed like they were unwilling to take the next step and bring in something like Mephisto, for example, or to set up the return of the X-Men, which would have been huge. Like, they were worried we can't go too far in a series, that really big stuff should be reserved only for the films. And then Falcon and the Winter Soldier, good or bad, you can like it or hate it, didn't really do anything for the overall story or anything that wasn't expected. It was mainly about Falcon grappling with becoming Captain America, which I think we assumed he would just do after Steve gave him the shield in Endgame. I don't know that we thought he'd turn down his friend's last request, essentially. In other words here, if you didn't see Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you won't be surprised to see him as Captain America or see Falcon as Captain America in a movie down the road someday. And so then one of the main reasons I thought Loki would be at the end of the Loki series or at the end of time, and only a vague hint at Kang would be given, was because they wouldn't give us a sort of backstory for the next overarching villain in a series on Disney+. But I'm not disappointed by it or upset to be wrong here. It was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. And to start to wrap this up, I don't know that this episode itself was good, as much as it was interesting and intriguing and obviously important, if that makes sense. I don't know that I'd want to watch it again because it was just something I enjoyed to watch. Yeah, you could argue it was a great performance by Jonathan Majors as Immortus and all of that, but there really wasn't much tension or excitement here, especially for a finale. We knew how it had to end. We knew the multiverse was going to be created or rejoined, I suppose. Everything we know about upcoming movies tells us this had to happen. And so as soon as Loki believed Immortus and that they shouldn't undo everything, and Sylvie did, you knew exactly what was going to happen. You just didn't know exactly how it was going to happen. In fact, the only one probably surprised by any of this was Immortus, ironically enough, since this was the first thing in, well, basically forever that he didn't know how it would all play out. And I like what they did with him here. It made sense that he would be sort of eccentric after spending eternity knowing how everything would go, and that he'd actually be eager to see a choice be made again. It's just a shame that, again, he's the only one who didn't know what that choice would be. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this finale. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you somewhere in between? And what did you think of the series overall and about the announcement of a Season 2? Whatever you think, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.